Today I'm going to show you how to screen print with heat transfer vinyl. I recently made this shirt for my son for our last Disney trip, and we are going back to Disney, so we are making Dad a shirt that goes along with his shirt. So here's some of the supplies that you're going to need. You're going to need a shirt or whatever article of clothing you want to screen print on. To make the screen, you will need the screen printing frame. I just got the Speedball brand. It came with the screen already, but I took it out and I bought some screen printing fabric. I bought 3 yards of the screen printing fabric, and it is the 110 mesh, and it's worked really well for me so far. And then you'll also get the piping that helps you put the screen into the frame, and to help with that I got this tool here. I bought this when I replaced the screen in my patio door. It's not very expensive. I think it was under $5, so I will link this all below. So that's to make the screen. And you'll also need the heat transfer vinyl. I get the Sizer or the Caesar brand. It works really well for me so far, and I just buy a roll and cut it as I go. And then you'll also need a squeegee. I really do feel like the squeegee makes a big difference, especially one that's large enough to go over your whole design. I was using little squeegees before and I felt like it would bleed a lot more, but this really makes the edges nice and crisp. And for the ink, I like this Couture Ink, but you can also use Speedball or whatever you find at the craft store. And then you also need some sort of stir stick to stir your ink. And you'll also need some sort of weeding tool. To heat set this all, I use my Cricut heat press, and you'll also need a Teflon sheet or a piece of parchment paper. That way when you are heat pressing the HTV onto the mesh, the glue doesn't seep through and stick it to whatever surface you are pressing on. So those are the supplies you'll need. You'll also need a Cricut cutting machine or any sort of cutting machine for your vinyl. So I am going to do a little screen record and show you how I make the design, and then we'll cut it. Okay, so I just opened Cricut Design Space, and I'm going to start this design by adding a big rectangle that is close to the size of the inside of my frame. So I'm going to do it 12 by 10. And I'm going to change the color to the color of my shirt. So now for the design, I had already created these in Canva, and just by using Google Images, I'm not selling these. This is a personal thing, so I'm going to upload my designs here. And they're huge, but I'm going to change the color to white if it lets me, just because that is the ink that I'm going to use, and I want to get a good feel for how it is actually going to look. I'm going to change this to about 10, I think, and I'm just going to put them in place as best I can to get a feel for the sizing and stuff like that. I don't want him to be too big. Okay, come on. I think something like that is good. Okay, so we need to make it so that our screen and our HTV is cut out where the ink's going to go through. So to do that, I'm going to select those two, and I'm going to weld them together. That way I can slice them on my background. Okay, combine, weld. I usually do this on my phone. Is it gonna work? Did it work? Okay, it didn't work. So another way to do this is to make this level layer invisible. And then we will select these and weld. All right, there we go. And now I can make this part visible again, and we will slice. Now that that's sliced out, you can delete these layers, and we will cut this out on our machine. You don't want to, I know HTV, it says you want to mirror it, but you don't want to mirror it just because of how it's going to be placed on that mesh. It doesn't need to be mirrored. So just take this image and cut it on your vinyl, and then we will weed and get our stencil ready. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, now that our design is done, is we want to cut our mesh to fit our screen. So I just put my frame on there, and I'm going to cut an inch and a half around the frame. That'll give you plenty of room to push it in to this little nook right there. Okay. And then we will cut our vinyl, and mine's about a 10 by 12, so I'm going to just do 12 by 12 here. Okay, now we can take this to our Cricut. I put my HTV shiny side down on my mat. I'm just using a light grip mat, and honestly my mats are disgusting, but just push it down, make sure the corners don't get creased up, and we will get our design going. Okay, I'm gonna have to make this a little bit smaller. We'll do 11.5. Now it will go on my 12 by 12 mat. And next, pair my thing, and I use the everyday iron on setting. I don't mirror it, and once again make sure those corners are in. I'm just going to help it not to get crinkled, but it should be good to go. So let's get this baby cutting. The cuts look pretty good, so let's turn this off and wheel this into its other spot. Now we need to weed this. Okay, so the settings I like to use are, I start at 285, and I'll end up really only doing the time for maybe 8 seconds to start. The recommended heat settings for the Caesar Easy Weed is which is what I'm using, is 305 for 10 to 15 seconds. But I feel like that's a little bit too much for this, and I'd rather go slow and work my way up than to have the glue on the HTV bleed out, because that will make the lines a lot less crisp if the glue seeps out. So I do 285 for about 8 seconds, and then I'll flip it over. And something that's very important in this is the Teflon sheet. Let me get that real quick. So here's my Teflon sheet. I'm going to start off by pressing and flattening out this mesh. That way my image goes on here nice and flat. It's a good thing to do while it's heating up. Get in there. I'm not too worried about the outside edges. Just the middle part. And this, I'm going to stick it right in the center, and I'm going to get my frame just to make sure that there's a good enough border on all the sides. So this looks good. I'm going to press it down, and I'm going to sandwich the HTV in the Teflon sheet. That way it doesn't stick to my ironing board, even though my ironing board is kind of gross. And I have a little bit of a lip on that side, so I'm going to do it on this side here. I have it sandwiched in here, so there's Teflon underneath my screens in there, and then I'll just fold it over. And I'll start at 8 seconds. And I am, since this is a bigger one, I am going to just roll it around slowly. Okay. It still probably needs more time, so I'm going to do another 8 seconds. Just push it. I'll do another 8 seconds on this side. I like to go in the 8-second increments just so that I can make sure I'm not doing it too much. There's that. And then I'll test it out by peeling it, making sure nothing is coming up. And I'm just gonna, for a couple seconds, heat set the back, just to really flatten it out. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, I think that looks great. So I will take you over to my little workstation, and I will show you how to put this into the frame. So I've got my frame, I've got this piping, and my transfer here. It's nice and cooled off. I want to make sure it's cooled off so it doesn't get warped. And I'm going to do this so that when your frame is up, so the right side facing up, that your design is right side facing up. So the layers will look like frame, mesh, vinyl on the very bottom. So I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to take my cord. You can kind of see that it already has it kind of bent for you to figure out the placement, and I'm just going to lightly stick it on top of here. And I take this and I push it in. Again, I'm just going to kind of align it, lightly push it in, and I'm going to push it down. Turn it, kind of make it so that the mesh is a little bit taut. Lay it on top, kind of use your fingers to pin it down. And you can use your nails to get a start. There's that. This last piece. Okay, so we've got a good start here, but you can kind of see that there's some bumps. So to get rid of those, you just pull the fabric and tighten it. pull it out, pull it tight, and then push real hard. I'm just gonna adjust little by little. You'll get it nice and flat. Okay, I'm gonna fix this bottom corner here. Okay. That feels pretty good. Okay, bye guys. Make sure everything's lined up on this side too. And it looks good. There's a couple of ripples right here. Let's fix this corner. Okay. Alright, that looks pretty good. There's a little bit of fuzz on there. Make sure to get rid of that. The joys of working with a bunch of fabrics. There's fuzz everywhere. Okay, so we are going to want to tape this. That way no ink seeps out. I didn't mention this in the beginning, but all of these edges we want to cover up. We don't want ink spilling out anywhere. So I'm just using some painter's tape and covering all this stuff. You want to make sure you prep as much as you can. That way when you go to ink, which is the scariest part of this, you have everything covered and you can just ink and swipe it with confidence. So, just gonna, oh, that's way too long. Just gonna cover all this here, and then we will get our shirt ready. Well, it's starting to stretch out a bit, so I'm gonna have to tighten it, I think. There's that. This little corner. And I'm going to tighten this side again. Okay. And now this part too. There we go. Make sure everything's down really well. Okay. That looks good. So now we got to get our shirt ready. And set that aside. For this, I am going to take my tape because I don't have a lint roller, and I'm just gonna wrap it around my fingers here and get all the fuzz off. If you just washed your shirt and it came out of the dryer, I highly recommend just ironing it out for maybe 30 seconds. It helps the ink set a little bit better and make sure that no moisture is coming through. This shirt's been dry for a while, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm just going to get all the fuzz off. That way nothing gets stuck in the ink. And you are going to want something to separate the layers. So you can use a piece of cardboard. You just want to make sure that it's wider, if it is cardboard, that it's wider than your design, because if it's not wider, the edges will make a mark in the ink. But I have a little hack. If you have old Cricut mats, you can use those on the inside, and it helps it to not slide around too. Let me go get one. Here is my mat. So I am just going to set this in here, make it nice and flat, and press it down on that stickiness. You can kind of see that it's sticking. And right here, you want to just make sure that your design isn't going over that, which I think it is. So I'm going to lower this a bit. Right here. fuzzes getting on there. Make it nice and flat and make sure the seams are even on each side, that it's not twisted or doing anything funky, so you know you're getting the true center of the garment. And I like to do my design starting at about 3 inches under the center of the neck. And I kind of just use my frame as a guide for how lined up these things need to be. Just making sure that the spacing's even on each side. Sometimes I feel like that looks like a good enough amount of space. I feel like the more I tweak this, the more wonky it gets. So I kind of just trust that it's hitting at the seam there. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So it's time to get our ink station ready. I've got this little dollar store tray here. If I haven't mentioned this already, it's just kind of good to put all your wet, inked up tools while you're working. And okay, I'm going to open this over on the side so no ink like this gets spilled, and it's good to give this a good stir. You want your ink to be smooth, that way when you're running it through the screen it glides on really smooth and doesn't bump or get messed up anywhere. You want your squeegee to cover the whole design in one swoop, that way it doesn't bleed and it goes on as easy as possible. So I'm just stirring, stirring, stirring. I'm gonna make a big layer of this right up top. Just make it as easy as possible for yourself. Make sure your line will get the top of your design and the bottom. And okay, another thing, you want to make sure that there's no like weird gaps and that your frame is nice and flat on your surface here. And you're just going to take a deep breath, hold it down with one hand. You want to do your squeegee kind of at a 45-degree angle, and you're just going to glide it through. And then I do mine two or three times for white. I'm going to look and make sure it's got all covered. I'm going to just set that right there, and I'm going to lift up my screen, and it looks great. I'm going to get all the excess ink off of this because I want to save as much as I can, and then I just wash this in the bathtub. I use a magic eraser to scrub all the ink off. You just let it dry and you can use it again. So I'm going to clean up here. We'll let this dry and then I'll show you how I heat set it. I am going to zoom you in because there's a little bit of a mess up right here. And I have a little tip for when this happens, and I use, it's not very clean but it will do its job. I use one of these nail dotting tools because it gets really precise. Can you even see it? There we go. You won't be able to see it in focus, but right here it got a little bit messed up. So I'm going to dip my little pen in some of that ink. Being careful not to smudge anything else. I'm just gonna fix it like that. This happened because there's a little bit of a loose fuzz. So just kind of go there. Once you heat set it, it will press in and you won't really be able to tell as long as you don't really glob it on there. I think that's better. There's a little fuzz there, but after this is fully dry, I'll just take a facial razor, and I just use this to scrape off the fuzz. But you want to make sure it's completely dry before you do that. My shirt is nice and dry. I use my blow dryer to finish drying it, and you can just tell, like, it'll be a little bit tacky if you if it's still wet. So everything's nice and dry now. I have my heat press set to 305 for 30 seconds, and I'm going to take my Teflon sheet, drape it on top, and I'm just gonna do this for the full 30 seconds and just move it so it's going across the whole area. So there's that. I'm going to do it inside out. All my fuzz again. And I don't need the Teflon for this, but I'm going to do it for another 30 seconds on this side. And the only thing left to do, or the only thing left to note, is that you do not want to wash this for 24 hours. You have to let it fully set and cure for 24 hours before you wash it. So it's always a good idea to pre-wash and dry this before you do it. But that's it. Alright, our shirt is finished. So now we have a nice father and son little shirt duo, and I'm so excited to see this on them.